Hi everyone, welcome to the channel After All That Years.
The moment I walked into that little Italian restaurant and saw my wife Elena laughing with another man, I knew my marriage was over. What I didn't expect was how calmly I'd handle it. It had been one of those gray February evenings when I decided to grab dinner alone. Nothing special. Just wanted to try that family place I'd driven past countless times on my way home from the office. Elena had sent a message earlier saying she'd be stuck at work until late, so I figured why not treat myself to a quiet meal away from the usual chaos. The place had character-dim lighting, the smell of basil and oregano in the air, checkered tablecloths that had seen better days. I found a spot near the front window, far enough from other customers to enjoy some solitude. Ordered the veal parmigiana and a beer, thinking the peaceful atmosphere would help me unwind after a brutal day of meetings. I was watching traffic crawl by outside when the door chimed, and in walked Elena. She looked stunning in a black dress I'd never seen before, something that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her hair was done up in a way that screamed, "special occasion," and her makeup was flawless. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd come to surprise me. Then I saw him walk in behind her. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of confident stride that comes with money. He placed his hand on the small of her back as they waited to be seated, and she leaned into him like it was the most natural thing in the world. The hostess led them to a table maybe 20 feet from mine, close enough that I could see everything, but far enough that they didn't notice me right away. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Work dinner, maybe. Client meeting. But the way he pulled out her chair, the way she smiled up at him as he helped her with her coat, none of that felt professional. When he sat down and immediately reached across to touch her hand, my stomach dropped. This wasn't business. This was intimate. I couldn't look away. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion. Elena was animated in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. She kept touching her hair, laughing at whatever he was saying. He leaned in close, whispering something that made her blush. The kind of blush I remembered from our early days, before life got complicated and we settled into routine. My food sat untouched as I tried to process what I was seeing. How long had this been going on? All those late nights at the office? The mysterious phone calls she'd taken in the other room? The way she'd started paying more attention to her appearance? Suddenly it all made terrible sense. Then Elena turned her head and saw me. The color drained from her face instantly. She went completely rigid, like someone had hit a pause button. Her companion noticed the change and followed her gaze, his expression shifting from confusion to mild interest when he spotted me staring back at them. I didn't wait for her to make the first move. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up and walked over to their table. My legs felt unsteady, but my mind was crystal clear. Elena's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. "Elena," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The man looked between us, still wearing that puzzled expression. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone polite but dismissive. I ignored him completely. Reached into my pocket, pulled off my wedding band, and placed it carefully on the table in front of my wife. The small metallic clink seemed to echo through the restaurant. "I wasn't expecting to see you here tonight," I said quietly. "Enjoy your dinner." I turned and walked out without another word. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow, but it was nothing compared to the numbness spreading through my chest. The drive home was a blur. I couldn't tell you which streets I took or how long I was behind the wheel. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they cramped, but the pain kept me grounded, kept me from completely falling apart. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house looked different somehow. The porch light, the wreath Elena had hung on the door last Christmas, the warm glow from the living room windows. All of it felt like a facade now, like walking into a museum exhibit of someone else's life. Inside, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat at our kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. Elena's chair. I could picture her there so clearly, how she'd prop her chin in her hand while telling me about her day, the way she'd steal bites off my plate when she thought I wasn't looking. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to her contact. My last text to her was still there. "Don't work too late, love you." The irony was almost funny. Almost. Without thinking, I typed, "Saw you tonight. Don't bother coming home." Hit send before I could second-guess myself. The message showed as delivered but unread. Minutes crawled by, then an hour, then 2. My phone sat silent on the table while I nursed my drink and tried to figure out how I'd missed the signs. Around midnight, I heard her key in the lock. My heart started hammering as footsteps approached the kitchen. Elena appeared in the doorway, still in that black dress, her makeup smudged and her face pale as paper. "James," she said softly, her voice shaking. "We need to talk." I stood up, every muscle in my body tense. "No, we don't. Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off, my voice colder than I intended. "How long has this been going on, Elena? Weeks? Months?" Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." I set my glass down harder than necessary. "Was it worth it? Throwing away 15 years for whatever thrill you were chasing?" She reached toward me, but I stepped back. Couldn't let her touch me. Not after what I'd seen. "You need to leave," I said firmly. "Pack a bag. Stay with him. Stay anywhere. Just get out of my house." For a moment I thought she might argue, might try to fight for what was left of our marriage. Instead, she nodded, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "I'll stay at my sister's," she whispered. "I don't care where you go. Just go." She turned and walked toward our bedroom, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my life. The sound of Elena moving around upstairs, opening drawers, zipping suitcases felt like nails on a chalkboard. I stayed in the kitchen, refilling my glass and trying not to think about what she was packing, what she was taking with her. Every sound was another piece of our shared history being torn apart. When she finally came back downstairs, she was carrying a small overnight bag and her work laptop. Her face was streaked with tears, but she'd pulled herself together enough to speak. "I'll call you in a few days," she said quietly. "When you're ready to talk." "Don't," I replied without looking at her. "There's nothing left to say." She hesitated in the doorway for what felt like an eternity. Then the front door opened and closed, and she was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. I'd expected to feel relief, maybe even satisfaction. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside my chest and ripped out everything that mattered. I wandered into the living room and collapsed on the couch. The house felt enormous and empty. Every corner held memories of Elena, her favorite throw pillow, the plant she'd insisted on buying despite my protests, the stack of magazines she never got around to reading. It was all still there, but it felt like artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. My phone buzzed. For a second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be her. But it was just a text from my brother Gary. "Haven't heard from you lately? Everything good?" I stared at the message for a long time. Gary was the steady one in our family, the guy who could handle any crisis with calm efficiency. But this? I didn't even know where to begin explaining this. Instead of responding, I tossed the phone aside and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Her laugh. The way she'd looked at that man like he was the only person in the world. By dawn, I hadn't slept a minute. Around 7, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Elena. "I need to explain. Please, James, let me try to make this right." I stared at the screen, part of me wanting to ignore it completely. But another part, the part I wasn't proud of, needed answers. "You get 10 minutes, I typed back. "After that, we're done." Her response came immediately. "The park on 5th Street. Our bench, please." Our bench, the same spot where we used to sit on Sunday mornings, reading the paper and planning our week, where we'd talked about buying a house, having kids, growing old together. The cruelty of that choice wasn't lost on me. But I grabbed my jacket and drove over anyway. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold the pieces together. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. When she saw me walking up, she started to stand. 10 minutes, I said, staying on my feet to maintain distance. "I know you won't believe this, but I never meant for it to happen," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I almost laughed. "You never meant for what to happen? To get caught? To fall for someone else?" The words came out in a rush. "James, I swear I didn't plan any of this. Things between us have been so strained lately, and I felt like we were just going through the motions, like roommates instead of husband and wife." There it was, the blame shifting. "So this is my fault somehow?" "That's not what I'm saying." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm saying we've both let our marriage drift. You work all the time, I work all the time, and we barely talk anymore except about bills and schedules. And your solution was to find someone new instead of talking to your husband? I met Trevor at a conference 6 months ago. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. 6 months. He was charming and funny, and he listened when I talked. Really listened. It started as just coffee, then dinners, and before I knew it. Before you knew it, you were sleeping with him. She flinched but didn't deny it. I kept telling myself it would end, that it was just a phase and I'd come to my senses. But being with him made me feel alive again in a way I hadn't felt in years. The honesty was almost worse than the lies. So what you're telling me is that our marriage was so dead to you that you had to find excitement somewhere else. I'm telling you I made a horrible mistake. Her voice cracked. I love you, James. I never stopped loving you. This thing with Trevor, it was like living in a fantasy. But you're my reality. You're my home. I stared at her. This woman I'd shared 15 years of my life with, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. The Elena I'd married would never have done this, would never have rationalized betrayal as some kind of midlife awakening. You want to know what I think? I said finally. I think you got bored. I think you decided our life wasn't exciting enough, so you went looking for something that was. And now that you got caught, you want to pretend it was all some big misunderstanding. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I intended. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been coming to me 6 months ago and saying you were unhappy. Fair would have been suggesting counseling or a vacation or whatever it took to fix things. Fair would have been treating our marriage vows like they actually meant something. She was crying harder now, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The woman sitting on that bench wasn't the person I'd promised to love for better or worse. She was a stranger wearing my wife's face. I want to fight for us, she said through her tears. I ended things with Trevor. I told him I was going back to my husband. Please don't give up on what we built together. I looked at her one last time, memorizing her face because I knew this would be the end. You gave up on what we built the first time you kissed him. I'm just accepting reality. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving her crying on our bench. As I drove away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. The next few days passed in a strange haze. Elena called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. She texted a few times asking if we could talk, if there was any chance of working things out. I didn't respond. What was the point? I threw myself into work, staying late and taking on extra projects. Anything to keep my mind occupied. My colleagues probably thought I was going through some kind of midlife crisis productivity phase. If only they knew. It was Thursday evening when my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. James, this is Trevor. I think we should meet. The audacity was breathtaking. Excuse me? I know this is awkward, but I think you deserve to hear the truth. Can we grab coffee tomorrow morning? Every instinct told me to hang up, but curiosity won out. Fine, Java House on Main Street, 9 a.m. I spent the night wondering what he could possibly have to say that would make any difference. But I knew I'd regret it if I didn't go. Trevor was already there when I walked in the next morning, sitting in a corner booth with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of polished look that screamed corporate success. When he saw me, he stood and extended his hand. I ignored it and sat down across from him. Thank you for coming, he said, settling back into his seat. Make it quick. I've got better things to do. He nodded, seemingly unfazed by my hostility. I want you to know that I didn't know Elena was married when we first met. She wasn't wearing a ring, and when I asked about her personal life, she said she was single. I felt my jaw clench. Another lie to add to the pile. When I found out the truth, he continued, I should have ended it immediately. That's on me. I take full responsibility for my part in this mess. Your part? I leaned forward. Your part was sleeping with my wife. There's no need to sugarcoat it. You're right. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. I handled this all wrong, but I want you to know that it's over between us. Completely. Elena made it clear she wants to save her marriage, and I respect that. How noble of you, he sighed. Look, I'm not trying to make excuses or earn your forgiveness. I just thought you should know that Elena really does love you. Everything she told me about your marriage, even when she was angry or frustrated, it was clear you were the most important person in her life. The words hit me like a slap. If I was so important, why did she spend 6 months lying to me? I can't answer that. I just know she regrets it more than anything she's ever done. I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. He seemed sincere, but it didn't change anything. The damage was done. Let me make something clear, I said, keeping my voice level. I don't care what Elena told you about our marriage or how sorry she is now. What you two did can't be undone. So don't call me again, don't contact Elena, and stay the hell out of our lives. I stood up and walked out without another word. The conversation with Trevor should have given me some kind of closure, but instead, it left me feeling more confused than ever. According to him, Elena had talked about me constantly, even while she was cheating. She'd painted our marriage as troubled but worth saving. Was that true? Or was it just another layer of deception? I drove home in a fog, trying to sort through everything I'd learned. Part of me wanted to call Elena, to hear her side of the story. But every time I reached for my phone, I remembered the sight of her laughing with him in that restaurant. The intimacy, the betrayal. Some things couldn't be explained away. When I got home, there was a package on my front step. No delivery notice, no return address. Inside was a manila folder with my name written across the front in Elena's handwriting. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table, staring at it like it might explode. Finally, I opened it. The first page was a letter in Elena's careful script. James, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I've ended everything with Trevor. The papers in this folder prove that I've requested a transfer to our Denver office, effective immediately. I've also started seeing a therapist to figure out why I sabotaged the best thing in my life. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to take me back. I just need you to know that you weren't the problem. I was. I got scared of how settled we'd become, and instead of talking to you about it, I destroyed everything we built. If you're willing to try counseling together, I'll do whatever it takes. If not, I understand. But please don't think this was about you not being enough. You were always enough. I just forgot how to appreciate what I had. I love you, James. I always have, and I always will. Elena. Below the letter were official documents, her transfer request, a therapist's business card with an appointment confirmation, and what looked like a formal letter ending her relationship with Trevor. I sat there for a long time, reading and rereading her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe we could find our way back to each other. But another part, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, knew it was too late. Trust, once broken, doesn't just heal because someone says they're sorry. I folded the papers back into the folder and put it in a drawer. Then I poured myself a drink and tried to figure out what came next. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. Elena respected my request for space, but I could feel her presence everywhere. Mutual friends would mention seeing her around town, always alone, always looking lost. Her sister called once to tell me how sorry Elena was, how she'd made a terrible mistake, but was willing to do anything to fix it. I appreciated the sentiment, but it didn't change how I felt. Work became my refuge. I took on every project I could find, stayed late every night, and slowly began to rebuild my sense of purpose. My colleagues probably thought I was having a breakdown, but the opposite was true. For the first time in years, I felt focused. One evening, about a month after the restaurant incident, I was working late when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says it's personal." My heart jumped, thinking it might be Elena. But when I looked up, I saw my brother Gary standing in the hallway. "Got a minute?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I saved my work and leaned back. "What brings you by?" "You've been dodging my calls for weeks. Figured if I wanted to talk to my brother, I'd have to ambush him at work." Gary had always been direct. It was one of the things I'd admired about him growing up. "I've been busy." "With what? Hiding from your life?" I bristled. "I'm not hiding from anything. I'm dealing with it." "By working 14-hour days and avoiding everyone who cares about you?" He shook his head. "That's not dealing with anything, James. That's running away." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me. What happened with Elena? And don't say it's nothing. I can see it written all over your face." So I told him. Everything. The restaurant, the confrontation, the 6 months of lies. Gary listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Jesus," he said when I finished. "I'm sorry, man. I had no idea. Now you know why I've been keeping busy. Have you talked to a lawyer?" The question caught me off guard. A lawyer? About divorce proceedings, asset division, that kind of thing. I realized I hadn't even thought that far ahead. I'd been so focused on the immediate pain of betrayal that I hadn't considered the practical implications. Not yet. You might want to. I know a good one if you need a referral. I don't know if I'm ready for that step yet. Gary studied my face carefully. What are you waiting for? It was a fair question. What was I waiting for? Some magical moment when the hurt would disappear? Some sign that Elena had suffered enough? I honestly don't know. Look, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I see. You're my brother, and you're miserable. You're hiding behind work because you don't want to deal with the fact that your marriage is over, and the longer you wait to make it official, the harder it's going to be. His words stung because they were true. I was in limbo, neither fighting for my marriage nor ending it. Just existing in this gray space between hope and despair. She wants to try counseling, I said finally. Do you? That was the million-dollar question. Did I want to try to rebuild what Elena had destroyed? Could I ever trust her again? Could I look at her without seeing that man's hand on hers? I don't think so, I admitted. Then you have your answer. That night, I called the lawyer Gary had recommended, made an appointment for the following week. It felt like crossing a bridge I could never uncross, but Gary was right. I couldn't stay in limbo forever. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Since we didn't have children and had kept our finances relatively separate, there wasn't much to fight over. Elena didn't contest anything, didn't ask for alimony or try to claim more than her fair share of our assets. Her lawyer said she just wanted it to be over as quickly and painlessly as possible. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt empty. The papers were finalized on a Tuesday in September, exactly 8 months after that night at the restaurant. I sat in my lawyer's office, signing document after document, officially ending 15 years of marriage with the stroke of a pen. That's it, my attorney said, gathering the papers. You're a free man. Free. The word felt strange. I wasn't sure I knew what to do with freedom anymore. I drove home to my house now, not ours, and found myself standing in the living room, looking around at the space I'd tried so hard to make my own. I'd repainted the walls, bought new furniture, removed every trace of Elena, except for one picture I'd kept on the bookshelf. It was from our honeymoon in Italy, both of us young and stupid and convinced we'd figured out the secret to happiness. I picked up the frame and studied our faces. We looked so certain, so invincible. When had that certainty started to crack? When had we stopped being a team and started being strangers sharing a house? Maybe Elena was right. Maybe we'd let our marriage drift until there was nothing left but habit and shared expenses. Maybe if I'd paid more attention, been more present, things would have turned out differently. But maybe not. Maybe she would have cheated no matter what I did or didn't do. Maybe some people just aren't wired for the long haul, no matter how much they claim to want it. I put the picture back on the shelf and poured myself a drink. Outside, it was starting to rain. One of those steady autumn downpours that makes you want to curl up with a book and forget the world exists. For the first time in months, that's exactly what I did. I grabbed a novel I'd been meaning to read, settled into my favorite chair, and lost myself in someone else's story. Someone else's problems. Someone else's life. It felt like a small victory. The months that followed were a study in rediscovery. I had to learn how to be single again after 15 years of thinking in terms of we instead of I. Simple decisions, what to have for dinner, what to watch on TV, where to go on vacation, suddenly became entirely mine to make. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I started running again, something I'd given up when Elena complained that my early morning workouts woke her up. I joined a book club at the local library and discovered I actually enjoyed discussing literature with strangers. I took a weekend trip to the mountains just because I could, just because I wanted to see the leaves change without having to coordinate with anyone else's schedule. Slowly, carefully, I began to remember who I was before I became half of a couple. Friends started setting me up on dates, well-meaning attempts to get me back out there. I went along with a few, more out of politeness than genuine interest. The women were nice enough, but I felt like I was acting in a play I hadn't learned the lines to. How do you explain to someone new that you're recently divorced? How do you describe what happened without sounding bitter or broken? After a particularly awkward dinner with a friend's cousin, a perfectly lovely woman who deserved better than my distracted company, I decided I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. Maybe some people are only meant to love once, deeply and completely. And when that ends, that's it. I was surprisingly okay with that possibility. One evening in November, almost a year after everything fell apart, I was grocery shopping when I saw Elena in the frozen food aisle. She looked different, thinner, her hair shorter than she used to wear it, dressed in clothes I didn't recognize. She was studying the ingredient list on a box of frozen dinners with the kind of concentration usually reserved for legal documents. Our eyes met across the freezer cases, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she raised her hand in a small wave, and I nodded back. It was polite, civilized, the kind of interaction you'd have with any acquaintance you hadn't seen in a while. She looked like she wanted to say something, but I turned my cart and walked away. Some conversations aren't worth having. Later, I wondered if I should have asked how she was doing. If she'd stayed in Denver, if the therapy had helped, if she was happy. But those questions felt like opening a door I'd worked hard to close. What would be the point? We were different people now, shaped by choices that couldn't be undone. As winter settled in, I found myself thinking less about what I'd lost and more about what I was building. My house felt like home again, filled with books I wanted to read and music I wanted to hear. I'd started cooking for myself, actually cooking instead of just heating up leftovers or ordering takeout. I was learning to enjoy my own company in a way I hadn't since college. The holidays were rough. Thanksgiving alone. Christmas morning without anyone to share coffee and presents with. I got through it by volunteering at a homeless shelter, serving meals to people who had problems that made my divorce look like a minor inconvenience. It was good to be useful, to focus on something outside my own situation. By New Year's Eve, I realized something had shifted. The constant ache that had been my companion for months was gone, replaced by something that felt like contentment. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The kind of deep, settled quiet that comes after a storm has passed. I spent New Year's Eve at home with a good bottle of wine and a stack of books I'd been meaning to read. At midnight, I raised a glass to myself and toasted the future, whatever it might hold. For the first time in a long time, I was curious about what came next instead of afraid of it. Spring brought new possibilities. I'd been promoted at work, finally getting recognition for all those extra hours I'd been putting in. The raise was substantial enough that I started thinking about making some changes, maybe buying a cabin in the mountains, somewhere I could go on weekends to hike and read and think. I'd also started dating again, casually and without expectations. There was Susan, a librarian who shared my love of mystery novels. And Margaret, a widow my age who understood that sometimes the past shapes you in ways that can't be changed. Nothing serious, nothing that threatened the careful peace I'd built. But it was nice to remember that I could still enjoy a woman's company. One Saturday in May, I was working in my garden, something I'd never had time for when I was married, when my neighbor called over the fence. "James, there's someone here to see you." I looked up to see Elena standing on my front porch, holding what looked like a casserole dish. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nervous. I set down my gardening gloves and walked over. "Elena, this is a surprise. I brought you something." She held out the dish. "Lasagna. I know it's your favorite." It was such a quintessentially Elena gesture, trying to fix things with food. I almost smiled despite myself. "You didn't need to do that." I wanted to, and I wanted to apologize, again, properly this time. I took the dish, feeling the warmth through the ceramic. "You don't need to apologize anymore. What's done is done." "I know, but I've learned so much this past year, about myself, about what I did to us. I needed you to know that I understand now how badly I hurt you." She looked genuinely remorseful, older somehow, like she'd aged more than the year that had passed. But I also saw something else in her face, hope, maybe, or expectation. Like she was waiting for me to say something that would change everything. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "I hope you're doing well." "I am, better than I was. The therapy helped. I'm back in town now, working at the branch office. I have my own place on Oak Street." I nodded, not sure what she expected me to say. We stood there for a moment in awkward silence, like two people who used to know each other well but had forgotten how to have a conversation. "I should let you get back to your gardening," she said finally. "Thanks for the lasagna. That was thoughtful of you." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Take care of yourself, James." "You too." I watched her walk back to her car, a small blue sedan I didn't recognize. As she drove away, I realized that seeing her hadn't hurt the way I'd expected it to. If anything, it felt like closing the last open chapter of a book I'd finished reading long ago. That evening, I ate the lasagna while watching the sunset from my back porch. It was good. Elena had always been a good cook, but it tasted like something from my past, not my present. When I was done, I washed the dish and made a mental note to return it to her, sometime when she wasn't home. Leave it on her doorstep with a thank you note. Keep things simple and clean. As summer settled in, I found myself thinking about the future with genuine excitement for the first time in years. I'd put an offer in on that cabin in the mountains, and it looked like it was going to go through. My nephew was graduating from college in the fall, and I was planning to visit him in California afterward, maybe drive up the coast, see some places I'd never been. The single life suited me, I realized. There was something to be said for answering only to yourself, for making decisions based solely on what made you happy. I wasn't lonely exactly. I had friends, work colleagues, neighbors I enjoyed talking to. I had enough connection to feel part of the world without the complications that came with sharing your life completely with someone else. One evening in late July, I was reading on my porch when my phone rang. It was Gary. "How's the bachelor life treating you?" he asked. "Can't complain. You?" "Good. Listen, I'm calling because I wanted to tell you something. I saw Elena last week at the grocery store." My stomach tightened slightly. "Okay." "She asked about you. How you were doing, if you were happy. I thought you should know." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you seemed to be doing well. That you'd bought a cabin and were taking some time to figure things out." He paused. She seemed genuinely glad to hear it. I wasn't sure how I felt about Elena checking up on me through my brother. Part of me was annoyed by the intrusion, but another part was touched by her concern. Maybe that was what healing looked like. Being able to wish your ex-wife well without wanting her back. "Thanks for telling me," I said. She also said something else. Said if you ever wanted to talk, you know where to find her. But that she understood if you didn't. I sat with that information for a moment. A year ago, the possibility of talking to Elena would have sent me into an emotional tailspin. Now it felt like a neutral option, something I could consider without my heart racing or my hands shaking. "I'll keep that in mind," I told Gary. After we hung up, I sat on my porch until the stars came out, thinking about forgiveness and second chances and the difference between healing and moving on. I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being angry at Elena. I didn't trust her anymore, didn't want to be married to her anymore, but the white-hot rage that had consumed me for months had cooled into something more manageable. Something like understanding. She'd made a choice that destroyed our marriage. It was a terrible choice, one that hurt me in ways I was still discovering. But it was also a human choice, the kind of mistake people make when they're scared or confused or just plain selfish. I couldn't forgive her for it. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I could understand it. And maybe that was enough. The cabin purchase went through in August, and I spent most of my weekends that fall fixing it up. It was an old place, built in the 60s, with knotty pine walls and a stone fireplace that needed some work. But it had good bones, and a view of the valley that took my breath away every time I saw it. I hired some local contractors to help with the major repairs, but I did most of the cosmetic work myself. Painting, refinishing floors, replacing light fixtures. It was satisfying work, the kind that left you tired but accomplished at the end of the day. Sometimes I'd stand on the deck with a beer, looking out at the mountains and feel something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete contentment. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The deep, settled kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being okay with it. I thought about Elena sometimes during those quiet moments. Wondered if she'd found her own version of peace, if the therapy had helped her understand why she'd blown up her life. I hoped so, in an abstract way, the same way you might hope a stranger finds what they're looking for. By October, the cabin was mostly finished, and I started inviting friends up for weekend visits. Gary came with his wife and kids, and we spent Saturday afternoon hiking and Saturday evening around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. It felt like the kind of weekend I'd imagined having someday, but never quite managed when I was married. "You seem different," Gary's wife Linda said as we were cleaning up after dinner. "Lighter, somehow." I considered that. Did I feel lighter? Maybe. Certainly less weighed down by expectations, my own and other people's. less concerned with living up to some ideal of what a successful marriage or a successful life was supposed to look like. I think I'm just figuring out who I am when nobody else is watching, I told her. She smiled. I think that's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me about divorce. That winter, I established a routine that worked for me. Weekdays in town, weekends at the cabin when weather permitted. I joined a hiking club and made some new friends who didn't know anything about my marriage or my divorce. To them, I was just James, a guy who liked books and good wine and long conversations around a fire. It was refreshing to be seen as a complete person instead of half of a failed couple. Spring came early that year, and by April I was spending most weekends at the cabin. I'd gotten into the habit of taking my morning coffee on the deck, watching the valley wake up below me. Birds, mostly, and the occasional deer family picking their way through the meadow. One Saturday morning, I was sitting with my coffee and the newspaper when I heard a car coming up the gravel drive. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the cabin was far enough off the main road that random visitors were unlikely. It was Elena. She got out of her blue sedan and stood by the car for a moment, looking up at the cabin with an expression I couldn't read from the deck. Finally, she walked up to the front steps. "I hope you don't mind me coming unannounced," she called up to me. "Gary told me where to find you." I set down my coffee cup, suddenly very aware that I was wearing old jeans and a paint-stained sweatshirt. "Elena, this is unexpected." "I know, I'm sorry, I needed to see this place. Gary said you'd done all the work yourself." I walked down from the deck to the front yard, keeping a careful distance between us. She looked good, healthier than when I'd seen her last. Her color better, her posture more relaxed. She was wearing hiking boots and jeans, her hair pulled back under a baseball cap. "Most of it," I said. "Still working on the kitchen." She nodded, looking around at the gardens I'd planted, the new fence I'd built, the deck I'd expanded. "It's beautiful, James. Really beautiful." "Thanks." I wasn't sure what else to say. "Would you like some coffee?" I was just sitting down to read the paper. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding. You're here now." She followed me up to the deck, and I poured her a cup from the pot I always kept warm on weekend mornings. We sat at the small table I'd built, looking out at the valley in the kind of comfortable silence that used to come naturally to us. "This is what you always talked about," she said finally. "Remember? You used to say someday you'd have a cabin in the mountains where you could go to think." I did remember. Late-night conversations when we were young and everything seemed possible. Dreams we'd shared before life got complicated, and dreams became luxuries we couldn't afford. "Took me long enough to do something about it," I said. "Are you happy here?" It was such a simple question, but it made me think. Was I happy? Not in the giddy, romantic comedy sense of happiness, but in the deeper way that mattered. "I think so." "Yeah," she smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, it looked genuine. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." We sat in silence for a while, drinking our coffee and watching a hawk circle over the meadow. It should have been awkward, having my ex-wife in the space I'd built specifically to be mine. Instead, it felt oddly natural, like we were just two people who used to know each other well, sharing a quiet morning. "I owe you an apology," she said eventually. "Elena, we've been through this. No, not for the affair. Well, yes, for that too, but that's not what I mean." She turned to face me fully. "I owe you an apology for the way I handled the divorce, for making you do all the heavy lifting while I wallowed in self-pity." I wasn't sure what to say to that. She was right. I had done most of the work of untangling our life together while she'd retreated into therapy and guilt. "I was so focused on my own pain that I forgot you were hurting too," she continued. "I acted like I was the victim in all of this, when really, you were the one who'd been betrayed. That wasn't fair." "We were both hurting," I said carefully. "In different ways. Maybe. But I was the one who caused the hurt in the first place." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, staring down into the dark liquid. "The therapy helped me understand a lot of things about myself. Things I probably should have figured out before I got married." "Like what?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, like the fact that I was terrified of getting old, of becoming my mother, stuck in a marriage that felt more like a business partnership than a love story. I thought if I could feel young and desired again, it would fix something in me that I didn't even realize was broken. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years, maybe ever. "And did it? Fix you?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. God, no. It just broke more things, including the best thing I ever had. I felt something shift in my chest, some small knot of anger finally loosening. Not disappearing. I didn't think it would ever completely disappear, but loosening enough that I could breathe a little easier. I'm sorry I waited so long to say that, she said. I was so caught up in wanting you to forgive me that I never really acknowledged what I'd put you through. That was selfish too. You're saying it now. Too little, too late. I looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. She seemed smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered. But also more real, if that made sense. Less like the perfect wife I'd thought I'd married, and more like a flawed, complicated person trying to figure things out. It's not too late for you to be happy, I said. You're still young. You can still build whatever kind of life you want. Can you ever see yourself forgiving me? Someday, I mean. Not now. I know it's too soon now. But someday. I thought about it, really considered the question instead of just reacting to it. I think I already have, in a way. I don't wish you any harm, Elena. I hope you find someone who makes you happy. I just don't think that someone can be me anymore. She nodded, tears starting to well up in her eyes. I know. I had to ask. I understand. We finished our coffee as the morning grew warmer, talking about small things. Her new job, my hiking club, books we'd read, movies we'd seen. Normal conversation between two people who'd once shared a life and now shared only history. When she got ready to leave, she hugged me. It was brief and careful, more like the kind of hug you'd give an old friend than an ex-spouse, but it felt right somehow. Final, but not bitter. Take care of yourself, James, she said, walking back to her car. You too, Elena. I watched her drive away, then sat back down on my deck to finish the newspaper. I expected to feel unsettled by her visit, maybe even angry that she'd shown up unannounced. Instead, I felt something like closure. Not the dramatic movie ending kind of closure, but the quiet kind that comes when you finally understand that some chapters of your life are really, truly finished. That afternoon, I took a long hike up to the ridge above my cabin, pushing myself harder than usual until my lungs burned and my legs ached. At the top, I sat on a boulder and looked out over the valley spread below me. My cabin was just a small speck in the distance, but I could see the smoke rising from the chimney of my neighbor's place, could make out the ribbon of the creek that ran through the meadow. It occurred to me that this was the first time in my adult life that I was completely responsible for my own happiness. No wife to consider, no marriage to maintain, no one else's needs or wants to balance against my own. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I thought about Elena's visit, about her apology, and her question about forgiveness. I realized that I had forgiven her, not in the sense of wanting to reconcile or pretend the past hadn't happened, but in the sense of releasing the anger that had been poisoning my own peace. Holding on to that resentment hadn't hurt her. It had only hurt me. Letting it go felt like setting down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for miles. The sun was starting to set by the time I made it back to the cabin. I built a fire in the fireplace, opened a bottle of wine, and settled into my favorite chair with a book I'd been meaning to read. Outside, the night sounds of the mountain began. Owls hooting, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant call of a coyote. For the first time in over 2 years, I felt genuinely excited about the future. Not because I had any grand plans or dramatic goals, but because I finally understood that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was whole on my own, capable of building a life that satisfied me without requiring validation or approval from anyone else. It was a good feeling, a free feeling. As I settled in to read, I made a mental note to call Gary tomorrow and thank him for giving Elena directions to the cabin. Her visit had been exactly what I needed, even though I hadn't known I needed it. Sometimes the best closure comes not from dramatic confrontations or passionate reconciliations, but from simple, honest conversations between two people who've decided to stop pretending that love alone is enough to overcome fundamental incompatibility. We'd had a good run, Elena and I. 15 years of mostly happiness, mostly partnership, mostly success at building a life together. The fact that it had ended badly didn't erase all the good times that came before. I could appreciate what we'd had while also being grateful for what I'd found since: peace, solitude, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly who I was when no one else was watching. The book was good, and the wine was better. By the time I went to bed, I was thinking not about the past but about tomorrow's plans: a hike to the waterfall I'd been meaning to explore, Some work on the garden, maybe a trip into town for supplies. Simple plans. Quiet plans. Plans that belonged entirely to me. It felt like freedom.